In a classical and Christian view, memory is not merely the things that we normally think about, where memory is facts, figures, even memorized passages or poems. In the Christian understanding, to remember is actually to be remembered, to be brought again into a community. That throughout redemptive history, when God calls his people to remember, it's not to mentally assent or mentally recall the things that he's done. It's actually a call to be the sort of people who he has called them to be, and actually to be the people who he has created them to be. So the call to remember is to actually live into that reality of what God has done and therefore what he is doing then. This then is the way that as Christians and as classical educators we think about memory. It's not just that we memorize these things because they're useful or even because they're beautiful. It's because they actually are a part of who we are. That in reciting a creed or a poem or a passage from a great book, we are actually being incorporated anew into the people who have loved and held these things to be valuable throughout time and throughout the tradition that we hold. There's a church I drive by frequently, and they have a sign which says, "Keep your beliefs, find your community." Of course, this sounds like a great slogan. It sounds like something that people would want, but there's a deeper problem here. What this says is that your beliefs are the things you cognitively assent to, and then the community is those with whom you worship and work. There's a disconnect between these two, as though somehow I can be in a community with people, believe things at great variance from what the rest of the people believe, and actually have community. This divorces the idea of who I am from what I know. And unfortunately, as easy as it is to sort of lampoon this slogan, it's become true of many churches in modern America, where what we think, the propositions, the beliefs, are what identify us as Christians. And that can be separated from our community, from the way that we live and move and have our being. It becomes a very individual thing. It's me and my assent to certain propositions. It's not being a part of a body, Christ's body, who is being formed together into the body of Christ by the Spirit. One of the challenges that this dichotomy presents is for those who have any sort of intellectual disability or even just who are neurodivergent. Because what this says is that the only way to measure the truth of their faith is whether or not they can assent to a certain list of propositions and assent to them in a certain format, in a certain way. They have to be able to answer questions with certain responses. They have to be able to somehow demonstrate the sincerity of those responses in ways that perhaps they're not able to or which are very difficult to do. And so what this does is this reduces their faith to those propositions, and it creates a question in the mind of other Christians, in the minds of church leadership. How do you test or how do you somehow determine the truth of their faith? Instead of saying that the way that we can actually trust the truth of their faith is that they are a part of the believing body and they participate in the rituals and routines in as much as they can of what God's people have always done. And so when we have a student who goes to bed at night after a service saying again and again and again, "Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice in the Lord," that is a deeply moving personal experience, which shows that the way that the truths of the faith have worked their way deep into him. And why should we doubt that to be true? Why should we feel like we have to ask, well, do you know what that means? Do you understand what it means to rejoice in the Lord? Instead of accepting and receiving as he has received, these are things which are true for him, because he identifies himself as a part of the body. And so he understands in a way that perhaps we often don't, that to remember is to be remembered into a part of that community, that he doesn't in any way divorce his assent to these things from having expressed those things and learned those things with his peers and with those with whom he works and worships.